Ethan Cole had imagined seeing Clara Bennett again in 100 different ways, but none of those versions included her standing beneath the old maple tree behind his mother's house, wearing a pale blue dress and holding a folded piece of notebook paper like evidence in a trial. 15 years had passed since her family moved away from Cedar Ridge. 15 years since 2 children had sat on that same wooden swing and promised they would never become strangers. Now Ethan had just turned 30, and Clara had returned without warning. She waited until the noise from his birthday dinner faded through the open kitchen windows. Then she stepped closer, her familiar gray eyes bright with nerves, and whispered, "It's time to keep your promise." Ethan stared at her, certain he had misheard. Clara unfolded the paper. His teenage handwriting was still visible beneath a purple crayon border.
"You promised that if we were both still single at 30, you would marry me."
What stunned him wasn't that she had kept the note. It was that part of him had been waiting 15 years to see it again. Before this story begins, like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, should a childhood promise shape an adult future? Or should love have to prove itself all over again? For several seconds, Ethan could hear nothing except the scrape of tree branches above them and the distant laughter of his mother's guests. Clara's mouth curved as if she were trying to make the moment lighter, but her fingers tightened around the paper. "You remember," she said. Ethan looked down at the note. At the bottom, beneath 2 uneven signatures, someone had drawn a house with a red roof, a dog the size of a horse, and 4 stick figures. One of the figures wore a construction helmet because, at 15, Ethan had already planned to build bridges.
Another held a paintbrush because Clara, 11 then, had announced that she would become an artist famous enough to be interviewed on television. He remembered the afternoon clearly. Clara's mother had packed their house into a moving truck after a bitter divorce. Clara had cried behind the maple tree because she believed leaving meant losing everyone she loved. Ethan had tried every joke he knew. None worked. Finally, desperate to stop her tears, he had made the promise. He had not expected her to save it. "I said when I turned 30, he murmured. Clara raised one eyebrow. "That is not what the contract says." "You wrote the contract. You signed it. You also wrote that I would buy you a yellow house and 3 golden retrievers." "4, she corrected. "One of them is hidden behind the mailbox." Despite himself, Ethan laughed. The sound made Clara relax for half a second, and in that small shift he saw the girl who had once climbed through his bedroom window to return a comic book she had borrowed without permission. Then she folded the note again. "I'm not asking you to marry me tonight," she said. "I'm asking whether you remember making me believe that some promises could survive distance." The humor left his face. "What happened, Clara?" Her gaze moved toward the house. Through the window, Ethan's mother was cutting cake while his younger sister arranged candles on paper plates. No one inside seemed to know that the past had walked into the backyard and placed itself between Ethan and the future he had planned. "I came back to settle my grandmother's estate," Clara said. "Her house has to be emptied, repaired, and either sold or transferred before the end of summer. I heard about Evelyn. I'm sorry." "Thank you." Clara drew a breath. "She left me more than a house. She left me a project." "And apparently, she left part of it to you." Ethan frowned. "To me?" Clara reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope bearing the name of a local law firm. "Tomorrow morning," she said, 9 o'clock, Mr. Harlan will explain everything." Then she started toward the gate. "Clara." She stopped. "Why bring the promise tonight?" Her back remained turned to him. "Because tomorrow you might think I only came back because I need something from you." She glanced over her shoulder, and the courage in her expression looked painfully close to fear. "I wanted you to know I remembered you before I asked for your help."
At 9 the next morning, Ethan arrived at Harlan and Pierce carrying 2 coffees and the uncomfortable sense that everyone else knew more about his life than he did. Clara sat alone in the conference room, surrounded by folders. She had tied her dark hair into a loose knot, and she wore a linen jacket over a white blouse. The sight of her in daylight was almost more disorienting than seeing her beneath the maple tree. She was no longer a memory framed by childhood. She was a grown woman with tired eyes, careful posture, and a pencil tucked behind one ear. "I didn't know how you take your coffee now," he said, setting 1 cup beside her, "so I guessed." She examined the label. "Oat milk, 1 shot, no sugar." "Wrong?" "Exactly right." Ethan sat across from her. "You still hated sweet coffee at 11. I still hate people who pretend not to remember things." Before he could answer, Martin Harlan entered with a leather portfolio. He had handled property matters for both families for decades, and he looked as uncomfortable as Ethan felt. Evelyn Bennett's will was simple until it was not. Clara inherited her grandmother's house, the surrounding 2 acres, and a brick warehouse near the abandoned Cedar Ridge railway station. The warehouse had once served as a freight depot. Evelyn had spent years trying to turn it into a community arts and trades center, a place where painters, carpenters, ceramic artists, and local students could work under one roof. Her final instruction created the complication. The property could not be sold for 12 months. During that period, Clara had the right to submit a rehabilitation plan to the county. Ethan, as owner of Cole Structural and Restoration, had been named independent building advisor. If both of them approved a financially viable plan by September 1st, a trust would release enough money to begin construction. If either refused, the warehouse would be sold after the waiting period and the proceeds divided between 3 charities. Ethan leaned back. Why would Evelyn name me? Mr. Harlan slid a sealed letter across the table. The handwriting on the envelope was unsteady but familiar. Ethan opened it. "Ethan, you once told me buildings were promises people made to the future. Clara once told me empty rooms could still remember laughter. I believed both of you. Do not approve anything out of guilt. Do not refuse anything out of fear. Make her prove the plan. Make yourself tell the truth." He read the last line twice. Clara stared at the folders. She knew I applied for a city fellowship in Chicago. She also knew I wasn't sure I wanted it. "When would you leave?" "September." The same deadline as the trust. Mr. Harlan excused himself, leaving them with floor plans, inspection records, tax documents, and Evelyn's final challenge. Ethan opened the engineering report. Water damage, roof failure, corroded steel connections, possible foundation settlement. The building was beautiful in the way old things sometimes were, full of dignity, history, and expensive problems. "This could cost twice what the trust contains," he said. "I know." "Then why are you smiling?" "Because you said could, not will." "I'm serious, Clara." "So am I." She pushed a binder toward him. Inside were grant applications, letters from local artists, projected rental income, workshop schedules, and a proposal for vocational partnerships with the community college. "I've been working on this for 8 months. Grandma didn't invent the plan in her will. She made sure I couldn't abandon it without looking you in the eye." Ethan turned pages slowly. The numbers were not fantasies. Some assumptions were optimistic, but the research was careful. "What do you do now?" he asked. "I design exhibits for small museums and historical centers. Most of it is contract work. The Chicago Fellowship would put me on a permanent curatorial track." "And this?" "This would be mine." The answer changed the room. Ethan had expected nostalgia, perhaps grief disguised as ambition. Instead, Clara had built something real.
She had not returned merely to reopen a childhood promise. She had returned with a professional plan that could reshape the town. He closed the binder. "I'll inspect the depot." Clara's shoulders loosened. "That is not approval," he added. "I know. And the marriage contract has no influence on my engineering judgment." She reached for her coffee. "Of course not. The marriage contract only governs your personal life." He almost smiled again. Almost. They drove to the depot in separate cars. Ethan told himself the distance was practical. His truck carried ladders, meters, safety equipment, and enough tools to dismantle half the town. Clara's compact rental carried 3 poster tubes and a cardboard box labeled Grandma's Keys. Yet when he saw her car in his mirror, following him along the same road they had once ridden on bicycles, he felt the first quiet shift inside him. Clara had returned. This time, he did not know how long she would stay. The freight depot stood at the edge of town behind a chain-link fence, its red brick darkened by years of rain. Half the windows had been boarded over. Weeds pushed through cracks in the loading platform, and a faded sign above the entrance still read Cedar Ridge Freight, though the last train had passed through more than 20 years earlier. Clara unlocked the gate. Ethan caught the expression on her face as she looked up at the building. It was not sentimental. It was focused. "You've been inside?" he asked. "Twice. Grandma brought me last winter." "You came to Cedar Ridge last winter?" "For one day. You were in Richmond on a bridge project." He looked at her. "You checked?" She mentioned it. The answer was too quick. Inside, sunlight slipped through holes in the roof and fell in pale columns across the floor. The warehouse smelled of dust, wet wood, and rust. Ethan put on his hard hat, then handed Clara a second one. She stared at it. "You remembered." "What?" "When we were kids, I said I wanted a purple hard hat. This one is blue. You remembered enough to know I would complain." He tested the floor before letting her step forward. They moved through the building slowly. Ethan photographed cracked mortar, measured deflection in the roof trusses, and marked unsafe zones with orange tape. Clara followed with the old floor plans and asked better questions than most clients. "What if the east wall becomes an independent shell?" she asked. "Could we brace it from inside and keep the exterior?" "Possibly." "What if the pottery studio goes on the ground floor so the kiln ventilation can run directly outside?" "Better than your original location." "What if we remove the mezzanine?" "That might save money, but you would lose almost a third of your usable area." She made notes without defending every idea. Ethan respected that. He also began to see how much of the plan belonged to her. She had drawn flexible gallery walls, workshop benches on locking wheels, a small recording booth for oral histories, and a public table running down the center of the main hall. "What's the table for?" he asked. "Anything. Sewing classes, community dinners, teen design workshops. People need a place where showing up doesn't require them to be good at something first." He glanced at her. She was tracing the line of the table on the plan, but her voice had changed. Softer. Personal. "Was that for you?" he asked. "What?" "A place where you could show up before you were good at something." Clara looked toward the broken windows. "My mother moved us 6 times after we left Cedar Ridge," she said. "New schools, new apartments, new explanations. Art rooms were the only places where nobody asked why I was temporary." Ethan lowered the tablet in his hand. He had spent years assuming Clara's life had become larger and brighter after she left. The photographs he occasionally saw online showed galleries, city streets, smiling co-workers, and carefully framed success. He had never considered how often she had needed to begin again. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "We stopped talking." "You stopped answering." Her eyes met his. That is not how I remember it. The old building seemed to become very still. Ethan remembered emails sent from the computer in the public library. He remembered waiting days, then weeks for replies. He remembered one message from Clara describing a school play and another asking whether the maple tree had survived a storm. He had answered both. Then his father had suffered a heart attack, and Ethan's world narrowed to hospital corridors, overdue invoices, and helping his mother keep the family business alive. Months passed. When he finally wrote again, the message bounced back. "I sent you an email after my dad got sick," he said. "It came back undeliverable. My mother changed providers. I sent you our new address." "I never got it." Clara pressed her lips together. "I mailed it to your house." Ethan thought of the year after his father's illness. His mother had been exhausted. Bills and letters piled on every surface. Nothing had been deliberately hidden. Something could easily have been lost. "Then neither of us chose to disappear," he said. "No," Clara replied. "But eventually, neither of us chose to come looking." The words landed without accusation, which made them harder to dismiss. A sharp crack sounded above them. Ethan moved instinctively. He caught Clara around the shoulders and pulled her back as a piece of ceiling plaster struck the floor where she had been standing. Dust burst into the air. For one suspended second, Clara's hands rested against his chest. Ethan could feel her breathing. She looked up at him, startled but unafraid. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. He released her at once and stepped back. Clara looked at the broken plaster, then at the orange tape in his hand. "I assume this means the building fails inspection?" "It means the inspector has excellent reflexes." "You pulled me out of the way." "You were standing under a damaged ceiling." "Still counts." Ethan marked the area unsafe, but his hand was no longer steady. By noon, he had enough information to know the depot could be saved. It would require difficult choices, donated labor, additional grants, and a design far more disciplined than Clara's first version. It was not impossible. Outside, they sat on the loading dock with sandwiches from the only deli in town. Clara removed her hard hat and shook dust from her hair. "So?" she asked. "So the foundation is better than the report suggests. The roof is worse. The east wall can probably be preserved. The mezzanine has to go." She winced. "All of it?" "Most." "That hurts." Buildings don't care about feelings. You wrote an entire essay in 7th grade about a covered bridge feeling lonely. I was 12. You got an A. Ethan looked across the overgrown tracks. You kept that, too? I kept more than you think. The folded promise in her bag seemed to exist between them even when neither mentioned it. He set down his sandwich. "Clara, why did you really show me that paper?" She took her time answering. "Because I found it in Grandma's desk after she died. She had written a note on the back." "What did it say?" Clara reached into her bag, unfolded the page, and handed it to him. Evelyn's handwriting ran beneath the childish drawing. "A promise made by children is not a debt owed by adults. But sometimes it points toward a truth they recognized before fear taught them to look away." Ethan read the sentence twice. Clara watched him carefully. "I didn't come back expecting a wedding. I came back because I realized I had built my whole adult life around leaving before anyone could leave me. Grandma thought the depot and you were the two things I had never been honest about. And what is the honest part about me?" Her gaze did not move. "That is what I came here to find out." Over the next 3 weeks, Ethan and Clara fell into a rhythm that felt both new and strangely remembered. Mornings began at the depot. Ethan brought coffee. Clara brought lists. He inspected, calculated, and argued for structural simplicity. She sketched, revised, and defended every feature that served a real purpose. They disagreed about the central staircase, the number of sinks, the location of the recording booth, and whether exposed brick was charming or merely expensive to heat. By late afternoon, they usually ended up at Evelyn's house sorting through decades of belongings. The house remained almost exactly as Ethan remembered it. Blue dishes lined the kitchen shelves. A brass clock ticked above the fireplace. The hallway still held pencil marks recording Clara's height through age 11, followed by 15 blank years. One evening, Ethan found her standing in front of those marks. "You should add one," he said. She looked at him. "At 26? Evelyn would have." Clara smiled. Ethan found a pencil in the desk drawer and drew a line above her head while she stood against the wall. She turned before he could write the date, leaving them closer than either expected. "You got tall," he said. "You did too. That tends to happen after 15. "I noticed." Her voice lowered on the last word. Ethan's attention dropped to her mouth, then returned to her eyes. The moment held, warm and uncertain. Clara stepped away first. "Box in the attic," she said. "Grandma labeled it Maple Tree Criminal Evidence." "That sounds like us." The box contained artifacts from a childhood that had once seemed endless. Bottle caps, comic strips, a broken compass, a friendship bracelet Ethan had claimed to hate, and a metal cookie tin sealed with masking tape. Their time capsule. They carried it to the kitchen table. Inside were 2 envelopes marked "Open when Ethan turns 30." Clara laughed in disbelief. "We were dramatic." "You were dramatic. You agreed to all of it." Ethan opened his letter. The handwriting was cramped and serious. "Dear 30-year-old Ethan, you probably build bridges and have a truck. Clara says you should have a red truck, but black is better. If she comes back, do not act weird. She is your best friend. Home is wherever she knows when you are lying. Also, do not forget the promise because she is scared, even when she says she is not." He stopped reading. Across the table, Clara had gone quiet over her own letter. "What does yours say?" he asked. She folded it quickly. "Nothing important." "That means it is important." She placed one hand over the envelope. "You first." He handed her his letter. She read it and her expression changed. The amused smile disappeared. Her eyes moved again over the line about fear. "You knew," she said. "I was 15. You still knew. What does yours say?" Clara hesitated, then passed him the page. "Dear 30-year-old Clara, Ethan will probably forget the promise because boys forget things. Do not be mad. Ask him whether he is happy. If he is happy, leave him alone. If he is not happy, remind him that he promised not to let you be alone forever. Also, you have to be brave and become an artist even if Mom says it is not a real job." At the bottom, in purple ink, she had added, "Do not marry him unless he chooses you again." Ethan looked up. That line wasn't written by an 11-year-old. "No, I added it when I was 19. "You opened the time capsule?" "Grandma mailed me my letter after I graduated college. She said the rules could survive one exception." "And you added that?" Clara nodded. "Why?" "Because by then I understood the difference between someone keeping a promise and someone wanting the life attached to it." The room seemed smaller. "Are you asking whether I want that life?" Ethan said. "I'm asking whether you have ever wanted any life enough to stop keeping one foot outside it." The question stung because it was accurate. For 7 years, Ethan had run Cole Structural and Restoration after his father's second heart attack forced him to retire. He had rebuilt the company, paid its debts, and become the person everyone called when a roof sagged or a foundation cracked. He was dependable, useful, present. but he had quietly applied for a position with a national engineering firm in Denver. The offer sat unanswered in his email.
It promised a higher salary, fewer emergencies, and no family name attached to every decision. He had not told his mother. He had not told his employees. He had not told Clara. She watched his face. "You're lying now," she said. He looked down at the childhood letter. "Denver offered me a job." Clara did not move. "When?" "2 weeks ago." "Before I came back?" "Yes." "When do they need an answer?" "August 1st. "Before the depot deadline?" "Yes." She leaned back in her chair. "Were you going to tell me?" "I just did." "Because your 15-year-old self exposed you." "Because I wasn't sure I wanted it." "That is not the same as choosing to stay." Ethan's frustration rose. "You have a fellowship in Chicago." "I told you on the first morning." "And you haven't decided?" "No, but I did not ask you to build a project that depends on me while hiding the possibility that I might leave." "I haven't approved the project." Clara flinched, almost too slightly to see. Ethan regretted the words as soon as they left him. She gathered the letters and returned them to the tin. "You're right," she said. "You haven't. Clara, we should finish the cost review tomorrow." Her voice was calm, professional, and suddenly distant. She left the kitchen before he found a way to repair what he had done. That night, Ethan sat alone beneath the maple tree with the original promise in his hands. For years he had believed staying in Cedar Ridge proved loyalty. Now he saw the truth more clearly. He had stayed because responsibility gave him a reason not to decide what he wanted. Leaving for Denver might be courage. Staying might be courage. The fear was not in either choice. The fear was in making one honestly and allowing it to matter. The next morning, Clara was waiting at the depot with 2 county officials and no coffee. She introduced Ethan as the project's structural advisor, not as an old friend. He understood the boundary and respected it, even though the formality made the warehouse feel colder. For the next week, they worked side by side without discussing Denver, Chicago, or the promise. The distance between them did not stop the project from improving. In some ways, it forced both of them to become clearer. Ethan redesigned the roof using a lighter system that preserved the original timber where possible. Clara eliminated a decorative gallery wall and redirected the savings toward accessible workstations. Together, they found a local steel fabricator willing to donate labor in exchange for apprenticeship placements. The community college offered equipment. 3 artists committed to renting studios, a retired contractor volunteered to supervise weekend crews. The numbers began to work. So did something else. Clara did not punish Ethan with silence. She challenged him when needed, thanked him when earned, and refused to treat his uncertainty as a personal insult. Ethan, in return, stopped trying to impress her with rescue. He asked what she needed. He listened when the answer was not him. One afternoon, they stood on the depot roof while Ethan marked sections for replacement. From there, Cedar Ridge looked smaller than it had when they were children. The courthouse dome, the water tower, the church steeples, and the maple-lined streets stretching toward the hills. Clara sat on the safe side of a roof beam. "Chicago called," she said. Ethan kept his attention on the measuring tape. "What did you tell them?" "I asked for another week." "Do you want the fellowship?" "I want what it represents." "Which is?" "Proof that leaving was worth it." He looked at her then. Clara's hands rested loosely in her lap. "Every time we moved, my mother said we were going somewhere better. Sometimes we did. Sometimes we did not. But I learned to treat movement like progress. Chicago is prestigious. It makes sense on paper. The depot makes no sense unless I admit I want roots." "That sounds like you already know." "No," she met his gaze. "Wanting roots and being ready to trust them are different things."
Ethan sat beside her, leaving enough space to honor the caution between them. "My father built coal restoration with one truck and a borrowed ladder," he said. "When he got sick, everyone acted like taking over was the obvious thing. I never asked myself whether it was what I wanted. Then the company became successful, and leaving started to feel like betrayal." "Do you hate it?" "No. That would be easier." "What do you hate?" "Being needed so constantly that nobody asks whether I am happy." Clara considered him. "Are you happy?" The question from her childhood letter. Ethan looked across the town he had spent years holding together. "Sometimes," he said, "but I have been mistaking being useful for being alive." Clara's expression softened. "That is the first honest answer you've given me about Denver. It is the first honest answer I've given myself." The moment between them was quiet, not romantic in any simple way, but intimate because neither tried to turn it into something easier. Then Clara reached into her pocket and handed him a wrapped granola bar. "You skipped lunch," she said. "You noticed. I still know when you are lying." This time Ethan smiled. At the county hearing 2 days later, the depot plan faced its first public test. The meeting room filled with artists, business owners, neighbors, and skeptics who believed the warehouse should be demolished. Clara presented the operating model. Ethan explained the rehabilitation plan and answered questions about safety, cost, and long-term maintenance. The final question came from Councilman Reed, who owned property near the depot. "Mr. Cole," he said, "this proposal relies on your firm overseeing Phase 1. Can you guarantee you will remain in Cedar Ridge through completion?" Clara looked at Ethan from the opposite end of the table. He could have offered a vague answer. He could have said the company would fulfill its contract regardless of his personal plans. Both statements would have been technically true. Instead, he chose clarity. "No," Ethan said. "I cannot make that guarantee tonight." The room shifted. He continued before anyone could interrupt. "My firm can complete the work whether I remain or not, but Ms. Bennett's proposal deserves leadership that is fully committed, and I am still deciding what my own future looks like. I will not use a public hearing to make a promise I have not earned." Councilman Reed smiled as though he had exposed a weakness. Clara did not. She stood. "Then I am requesting that the vote be postponed for 7 days," she said. "The project should not proceed until its leadership structure is stable." The council agreed. Outside, reporters and supporters gathered near the steps. Clara walked past them toward the parking lot. Ethan followed. "You did the right thing," she said before he could speak. "It may have cost us the grant. It may have saved the project from being built on another uncertain promise." "Are you angry?" "Yes." "Because I told the truth?" "Because you waited until a public meeting to decide honesty mattered." He accepted that. Clara opened her car door. "I'm going to Chicago tomorrow," she said. "They invited me to tour the museum before I decide." Ethan felt the consequence before he understood it. "For how long?" 3 days. "And after that?" "I choose." She looked at him across the roof of the car. "You should too." Clara left before sunrise. Ethan spent the first day telling himself he needed quiet. By noon, the quiet had become unbearable. He went to the office and asked his operations manager, Luis, to close the door. For 7 years, Ethan had treated every important decision as his burden alone. That habit ended in a room filled with blueprints and stale coffee. He told Luis about Denver. Then he showed him the firm's numbers, the depot schedule, and a restructuring plan Ethan had been too cautious to propose. Luis could become managing partner. Ethan could reduce emergency fieldwork, focus on structural design, and open a small preservation division built around projects like the depot. The company would no longer depend on one Cole making every decision. Luis studied the plan.
You thought leaving was the only way to stop carrying everything, he said. I thought staying meant nothing could change. And now? Now I think I was waiting for someone else to give me permission to build the life I wanted. Luis closed the folder. Do not stay for a woman. I'm not. Good. I'm staying because I want the company, but not the way I have been running it. I want the depot. I want a home that feels like a choice instead of an assignment. Ethan paused. And I want the chance to know the woman Clara became. Luis held out his hand. Then make me a fair offer. They worked until midnight. The next day, Ethan called Denver and declined the position. He did not feel trapped when the conversation ended. He felt responsible in a new way. Not to the past, but to a decision he had made in the present. He spent the third day securing a completion guarantee for the depot through a regional partner. The arrangement protected the project even if coal restoration changed leadership. He revised the county presentation and sent every document to Clara without asking her to come back. His message contained only 4 sentences. The project no longer depends on my personal uncertainty. I declined Denver because I chose a different future, not because I expect anything from you. Take Chicago if it is what you want. When you decide, I will respect the answer. Clara did not reply. She returned to Cedar Ridge the following evening, but she did not go to Ethan's house. At the rescheduled county hearing, he saw her standing beside the depot plans in a charcoal suit, composed and unreadable. The council reviewed the new leadership agreement, revised budget, and completion guarantee. After 40 minutes of questions, the rehabilitation plan passed by a vote of 6-1. The room erupted in applause. Clara smiled, but she did not look at Ethan until the crowd began to leave. Congratulations, he said. To us, she replied. Did you accept Chicago? I turned it down. His heart lifted, but she raised a hand before he could speak. I did not turn it down for you. I negotiated a consulting contract instead. 2 months a year, project-based with enough flexibility to direct the depot. That sounds like a better fit. It is. They stood among empty chairs and abandoned paper cups. I read your message, she said. I assumed. You declined Denver? Yes. And changed the company? I started changing it. Luis has not signed yet. Why didn't you tell me to come home? Because Cedar Ridge has to be your choice. Clara's eyes shone. And what about me? She asked. Am I your choice, or am I still part of a childhood obligation? Ethan had rehearsed answers for 3 days. None were enough. So he told the truth without decoration. The promise brought you back into my life, but it is not why I want you in it. I want the woman who can turn an abandoned warehouse into a place people need. I want the woman who tells me when my honesty arrives late. I want the person who remembers my coffee order and refuses to let me confuse sacrifice with love. Clara's breath caught. Ethan continued. But I will not ask you to marry me because a 15-year-old boy signed a page. I want to earn the right to ask as the man standing here now. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she stepped closer and placed the folded contract in his hand. Good, she whispered, because I did not come back to collect a debt. What did you come back for? To see whether we could choose each other again. Ethan held out his hand. Clara looked at it, then at him. When she placed her hand in his, the gesture was small, deliberate, and entirely present. They began with dinner. Not a wedding, not an announcement. Dinner at a quiet restaurant where they asked questions no childhood friendship could answer. They talked about money, work, family, grief, cities, children, solitude, and the kinds of lives that frightened them. They disagreed. They laughed. They discovered that adult compatibility was less magical and more meaningful than memory. Over the next 4 months, the depot changed around them.
The damaged roof came down. The east wall was braced. New windows filled the main hall with light. Clara directed volunteers without losing patience, except when Ethan changed measurements without updating her drawings. Ethan learned to delegate, though Lewis repeatedly threatened to hide his truck keys. Clara moved into Evelyn's house and painted the kitchen a warmer shade of blue. She added her new height mark to the hallway. Beneath it, she wrote, "Home by choice." Their relationship grew without pretending the lost years had never happened. There were awkward conversations and old reflexes. Clara sometimes packed emotionally before any disagreement had ended. Ethan sometimes tried to solve problems that required listening instead. Each time, they returned and tried again. On the first Saturday in December, the depot opened to the public. The central table Clara had imagined ran the length of the main hall. A pottery instructor demonstrated a wheel near the south windows. Retired carpenters helped teenagers build bookshelves. Evelyn's photograph hung beside the entrance beneath a brass plaque naming the building the Bennett Center for Art and Craft. After the crowd left, Ethan found Clara alone near the table, turning off lamps one by one. "There's one thing left," he said. She looked around. "The recording booth door sticks. Besides that." He led her outside. Snow had begun to fall over the old tracks. Beneath the restored station sign, Ethan had placed a simple wooden bench made from one of the original roof beams. On it sat the metal time capsule and 2 envelopes. Clara looked at him. "What did you do?" "I followed instructions." He gave her the first envelope. Inside was the childhood contract, preserved between 2 clear sheets. Beneath it was a new page. This one had no drawings, deadlines, or promises about yellow houses. It said, "Clara, I cannot promise that distance, fear, work, or time will never challenge us. I can promise that I will not use uncertainty as an excuse to avoid choosing. I choose you as you are now. I choose the life we are building, one honest decision at a time. If you want the same life, I would like to keep choosing it with you." She finished reading and looked up. Ethan lowered himself to one knee, holding a ring that had belonged to Evelyn. Clara covered her mouth, but he could see that she was smiling through tears. "This is not because we were single at 30, he said. "It is because every day since you came back, I have understood more clearly why home once meant the place where you knew when I was lying. You still know. You also make me want to tell the truth before you have to ask." He drew a breath. "Clara Bennett, will you marry me?" She laughed softly. "You took 15 years to ask properly." "I wanted the engineering to be sound. The foundation is acceptable. Is that a yes?" She knelt in front of him rather than making him wait below her. "Mrs., she said, but we are choosing the house color together." "And the dogs?" "Negotiable." He placed the ring on her finger. Then they stood beneath the restored sign, hands joined, while snow settled along the tracks that had once carried people away from Cedar Ridge. 6 months later, they married beneath the maple tree. The ceremony was small. The depot's artists made the decorations. Luis served as best man and used his toast to announce that Ethan had finally learned how calendars worked. Ethan's mother cried before Clara reached the aisle. On a table beside Evelyn's photograph sat the original contract, the new letter, and the childish drawing of the yellow house. They did not frame the old promise as proof that fate had decided everything for them. They displayed it as evidence of something gentler. 2 children had once believed that love meant never leaving. 2 adults learned that love meant having the freedom to leave, the courage to stay, and the honesty to choose each other without debt. At the reception, Clara pulled Ethan away from the music and led him to the hallway inside Evelyn's house. Beside her height mark, she had added another line. "Ethan and Clara, first day of the life we chose." He looked at her. "You know that is not a height measurement." "It is an improvement."
You are still rewriting the rules. You are still signing them. She handed him a pencil. Ethan signed beneath her words. Some childhood promises should remain childhood memories. Others survive not because they are binding, but because life gives two people the chance to understand what the promise was truly asking. Not, will you owe me forever, but, when the time comes, will you recognize me? And will you choose me again? Ethan had spent 15 years believing the most important part of his promise was marriage. He finally understood that the important part was returning to the truth. Clara had never asked him to repay the past. She had asked him to be fully present for the future, and this time, he was. If this story reminded you of someone who once felt like home, share it with them. And tell us below, can a promise made in childhood become real love? Or does every lasting relationship have to be chosen again as adults?